Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Whole Kids Foundation Garden Grant Application How-To webinar for our 2021 Garden Grant cycle. I'm going to give just a minute or so for a few more people to join us. I can see here people are still, seems like they're still logging on. So I'm going to give a little bit more time and then we'll get started. We'll dive right in. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining. We're super excited. It seems like we're gonna have a pretty good turnout for today's webinar. My name is Stephanie Porto. I am the Programs and Operations Manager with Whole Kids Foundation, and I am joined by our intern, Kristen Fote. She's going to help at the end field some of the questions that we get and use some of the time towards the end to answer questions live. If you've emailed our grants inbox with questions already, there's a very good chance that Kristen was the one supporting you. So we'll get to hear from her as well at the end. So to get us started, we're going to go over just a couple of basic housekeeping type items. You can, if you haven't already, always email us at grants@wholekidsfoundation.org. You can find a ton of information as well as the link to our application site, which we'll talk about later, on our website at www.wholekidsfoundation.org. We are going to ask that you submit your questions in the QA function of Zoom. We're going to pull all of the questions from there rather than from the chat box. And the important piece of that is that any questions we don't get to answer during the live webinar, we're going to do as much follow-up as we can. And so if you put them in the chat, we won't be able to download them. Whereas if they go into the Q&A, we can pull that information and make sure that as many questions as y'all have, we're able to answer afterwards. Additionally, there will also be a recording available in a follow-up email that you get as a registrant, as an attendee for the webinar, but it will also be available on our website. So if you don't get that email or it's just easier, you can always find this information, this link on our Garden Grant page. So for our agenda today, we've got a ton of information, so we're gonna go through it thoroughly, but as quickly as we can. We're gonna just give a brief overview of Whole Kids Foundation and some of our other grant programs. We're going to talk about the eligibility and requirements for this particular grant program, our Garden Grant. We'll review the grant timeline again. I will share and highlight some of the most useful resources that are on our website as it relates to this grant program. We're going to talk a bit about the online grant portal where you submit your applications because there's a lot to navigate there. And then we will leave time for questions at the end. So the mission of Whole Kids Foundation is to improve children's nutrition by supporting schools and organizations and inspiring families. And the way that we do this is by supporting schools and organizations through our various grant programs. We provide support to school district food services and equipment grants of salad bars to both schools and school districts. Our salad bar grant program is, as you might suspect, currently on hold as a result of COVID. More to come on that. We will definitely be sharing updates on the website as things progress in our current world. Through our Healthy Staff program, we provide a 2-hour free health and wellness course for teachers and staff, as well as school food service staff for their own wellness. We also have a digital version of the Healthy Teachers version of the program. If that's something that interests you or you think might be helpful to the teachers and staff in your school, there's a ton of information on our website about that and available through a digital platform, which is super awesome. And then we have our Garden and Bee grant programs, which I'll share a bit more about. So our Bee grant program, we partner with an organization called the Bee Cause Project because we needed not only a honeybee expert, but also an expert who knows how to bring bees to schools. So our close collaborator is based out of Charleston, the Bee Cause Project. They're fantastic. The Bee Grant is valued at $2,000. It includes consultation with the Bee Cause Project, technical support, as well as educational materials, and the choice of 4 different grant type options for hosting your bees, essentially hive equipment. And the Bee Grant is closely tied to our Garden Grant program, which is why we talk a little bit more about it on this webinar. It can be a really great complement to a garden program or a garden grant. The Bee Grant is not being held concurrently with the Garden Grant this year like it typically is, another result of COVID, but we will be sharing plenty of updates on our website as 2021 progresses as to when that particular program will become available again. And then another program to support school garden work and beyond is our Garden to Cafeteria program that we've done in partnership with Slow Food USA. It's a step-by-step toolkit available for free on our website that will provide information and guidance to a school district that is looking to safely serve any garden produce that's harvested by their students in their cafeteria. The entire toolkit is free for download online, but I do think the apply on site, this is probably a little bit outdated just due to COVID again as well. So always updates on that available on our website or something you could reach out to us for more information about. So why do we have a garden grant program? As I'm sure many of you know, before kids will be comfortable eating the vegetables on their plate, it helps if they have a relationship with and feel comfortable with those vegetables. So this is why we believe gardening with kids is so essential and why we have this garden grant opportunity to support edible educational gardens in schools and nonprofits, really to empower them to increase their consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables as they get to know where their food comes from, and learn a bit more about how food truly grows. So there's a ton of research out there that supports this idea that a child's involvement in a garden will increase their nutrition knowledge, their willingness to try, and their preference for fruits and vegetables, which are all predictors of their intake, which, as you might imagine, also has implications for other things. So I won't read all of these statistics to you, but some of the things they've seen in that research are kids who are exposed to the garden increase their fruit and vegetable intake, which has a direct result on things like their health factors such as decreased BMI, diastolic blood pressure, less weight gain, and then they've also seen increase in the mean number of vegetables chosen in a lunch line and an increase in the mean number of vegetables consumed overall, as well as the average number of vegetable varieties consumed per month, including those that the kid hadn't grown specifically in their garden. So since 2012, our Garden Grant program has invested $12.5 million in over 6,000 schools and organizations, supporting 3.8 million children through just this one program and their access to this edible education programming. So who do we support with our Garden Grant program? All schools and nonprofits across the US and Canada. We provide support in all areas, so not just specific areas of the US or Canada. So, for example, we're not just supporting schools and organizations and communities with Whole Foods Market. Really, any school that meets the school or nonprofit that meets the eligibility criteria across the country and in Canada can apply. Each year, we typically receive between 900 and 1,100 applications. So what's included in the grant? It's a $3,000 monetary grant. It's a pretty flexible grant. I'll talk about the specifics of the spending guidelines in just a second. But at a high level, the way that our grant program and our grant application works is that it's set up for the applicant to really tell us what their plan is. It's got a lot of questions and it's thorough, but it's not prescriptive beyond that. We really want to hear from you all about what your garden will be like in your space and in your community. So what we're looking for when we evaluate, when we review the garden grant applications, are a lot of things. One of the big ones is child involvement and connection to healthy eating. So we really love to see applications and programs that involve the kids or the students in all aspects of the garden, from planning to planting to harvesting to maintenance, to you know, how they learn in school. We really like to see that the garden is also an impetus for conversation about where food comes from and about healthy eating overall. Additionally, being integrated into not only the academics of a school or the educational programming if you're a nonprofit applying. So, of course, in a science class, you might find a great way to use your garden, or even in an art class. But beyond that, we really love seeing that the garden has become generally a part of the school or overall community culture, being utilized by parents, teachers, outside community members, not just the students, but really engaging those within the school, various stakeholders, administration, science teachers, all teachers, garden coordinators, but then also engagement with the external community. So, that might be like volunteers. You might engage those in your community, or if you are harvesting produce and sharing it with your community members, those in your neighborhood, for example, would be another example of that. And then leadership support, it's a partial requirement on our grant, which I will outline, but that your administration, so if your school, say your principal or a nonprofit, your ED, is in support of the garden program, that they support the development, if you're a new garden, or the growth of your garden program. We just find that when your administration and your leadership within your organization supports the garden, it really lends to the life of the garden over time. And then sustainability, this is sustainability of the garden, the life of the garden. All of the things I just mentioned would really contribute to the sustainability of your garden over time. But we look to see that kind of thing, as well as, we recognize that our grant program will support your garden, but only so far. $3,000 is a great amount of money to get your garden started or to make a great improvement, but it will not sustain the life of your garden over time. So other things we look at as it relates to the sustainability of your garden over time would be, resources for additional funding or plans for that kind of thing beyond our grant program. So use of the funds. These $3,000 monetary grant can be used on a brand new or pre-existing garden. It can be any type of garden, as long as you're growing food or other edible items with your kids. So we get a lot of questions about, grains or herbs or that kind of thing. It's all applicable, so long as as it's edible education with them. The funding guidelines are pretty flexible. We have just a handful of restrictions or like time guidelines. So the money can be used as a stipend for scholarship for someone involved in your garden to attend a training. That would be if you have a garden coordinator, for example, and they want to do a master gardener training, or they want to go to some sort of edible education training with others doing this kind of work. The money can be used for that, but only a portion of it. So you can only use 30% or $900 to support the stipend for scholarship attendance. And then 3 things the funds cannot be used for would be real estate, travel funds, and field trips. Real estate and field trips being pretty straightforward. Travel funds would be if you were going to send somebody involved in your garden to a training, the money should go towards the registration fee or the cost of the training, rather than say their airfare or gas to get to the training. In terms of requirements on time, so we do not have a timeline or a specification by which you must spend all of your $3,000. We just ask that you start spending within 1 year of receiving them. We do not have a requirement for receipts to be turned into us, but we do ask that you keep them on hand for your own purposes, for any other grant purposes for a number of years, but they do not need to be shared with us, receipts for things you purchase using the grant. And then in terms of reporting requirements, we have one reporting requirement. It comes about 1 year from when you receive your grant funds. You submit a progress report to us through the same portal through which you applied. So school and nonprofit organization eligibility. For a school, the garden must be on school grounds. If it's not on school grounds, we typically ask that it's within a 5-minute walk from your school grounds. If you have a community garden that's right next door to your school campus, and you work in partnership with them, then that might be something that is doable. We just, a drive away would be not an eligible situation, simply because we find that it really takes the garden being that close for it to be truly integrated into the community. The school has to serve any grades, K through 12. If you serve pre-K only, you are not eligible. But if you have pre-K and some of the lower grades, then you are eligible. And then all public schools are eligible. And then if you're a private school, you must be a registered nonprofit. You have to have that 501c3 status as a private school to indicate that you're a nonprofit. And then growing the edible items. And then for nonprofit organizations, it's very similar. Must have the 501c3, and I'm realizing I'm saying 501c3 applicable to US. For Canada, you just must be a registered charity. And then work with at least 10 children in the K through 12 grade range on a regular basis and grow edible items. So in the past year or so, the last time we ran this program right before COVID, we opened up the grant to previous recipients being able to apply again. So if you've received a Whole Kids Foundation Garden Grant in the past, you are eligible to apply again, contingent on a handful of factors. One being that you've completed your follow-up documentation, so that might be a progress report, or if you're an earlier recipient, we do utilize a shorter grant survey to touch base with recipients. And then the other is if you've received your last garden grant in the past year or in the past cycle, for a situation like now where we're a little bit delayed, then you are not eligible. You would just have to wait until our next cycle. So right now, if there's anyone on this grant, how that applies now is if you received a garden grant in our 2020 cycle where you received funds at any point during 2020, you would not be eligible for this application window. You would just have to wait till our next one, which may very well happen later this year. So you won't have to wait very long. So some elements of the application that are super important, and we often get questions about, the first one being the use of a fiscal sponsor. So this is not required. So it may not be applicable to all of you. Just because I'm talking about it does not mean you need to have one. This is specific to organizations and schools that are opting to include another entity to take fiscal responsibility for their grant if awarded. It just means that you are designating another organization or entity to receive the funds. So we would make the check out to that entity, and they would be responsible for administering the funds to your school or organization where the garden lives. Some examples of this would be if a school wanted to make their PTO or PTA a fiscal sponsor, we write the check to the PTO and PTA, and they're the ones managing the money and administering the funds to, say, your garden program or your garden club. Another situation might be a school that works with what we call a school garden support organization, where a nonprofit is working in partnership with the school to support their garden program. You might have that organization be the fiscal sponsor. There are a lot of right answers for this. So if you have questions specific to your situation, please email us at grants@wholekidsfoundation.org. We get a lot of these questions. We'd be happy to answer them for you and think through this. Again, not required. So if you do include a fiscal sponsor, this will also be included as the grantee on your application. This information lives together in the application. So you'll put all this information in the same page online, and it just tells us who's going to be fiscally responsible and who we write the check to if the grant is awarded. Additionally, in the same spaces where you would designate the individual responsible for signing the grant agreement, which is like the formal documentation we send out when we make awards. So a little bit about the application. If you haven't already gotten in to take a look at it, it is thorough. It's really meant to be a roadmap for a successful school garden. It is written and it was built in partnership with Food Corps in the past to really cover all of the components of a successful garden project, everything from leadership support, like we mentioned before, to plans for additional funding in the future, to how to engage your external community, really helps you create a plan. If you have an existing garden, you may have a lot of this figured out already. If you are building a new garden, it can really be a beneficial guide to helping you think through some of these things, which, even if you haven't fully thought through all of them, that's okay. We get a lot of people sharing their progress with us, so to speak, and their plans that may not be fully established yet, but we know that the application is serving as a way for them to start thinking through how it could serve their garden. So some requirements of the application. As I mentioned before, we do require an acknowledgement of leadership support from your school or organization. So you will have to upload a letter on your organization or school letterhead from your principal or your executive director. It doesn't have to be lengthy or long. I think on my next slide I have some pieces about that, so I'll hang out 1 second on that. The community partner, and then photos of your garden plan. I'll give you a little bit more specifics about each of these. This information is all also included in the application as well as you go through those directions. So the letter of support. We often get a question of if we have a template for the letter of support. Is it something specific we're looking for? And there is nothing specific beyond wanting to see support from your leadership. So it's simply an acknowledgement that the program is being built or continued, that they are in support of it, why they're in support of it. It doesn't have to be long, and then signed by that person. So community partner. The community partner lends to what I spoke about earlier about having engagement with your external community and how that can support the sustainability of your garden over time. Programs that have support from their community outside of their, one particular school or organization are more successful. There are a lot of ways this can look. It can be a nonprofit or it can be a for-profit business. And this is how the community partner differs from, say the organization applying or the fiscal sponsor who have to be nonprofit, in nature. The community partner does not have to be a nonprofit. So you can work with anyone from a master gardener in your community to a Lowe's, to a Whole Foods Market store, or, really anyone in your community who has a connection to your garden and wants to support in some way. And that way is not, there are a lot of right answers here too, and it will look different for everyone. It can be financial support, it can be volunteer support, it can be donations. So, an example like Lowe's is maybe somebody gets donation of lumber to build garden beds. Or the master gardener would really just serve as advice and consultation on key aspects, technical things about gardening and how to maintain your garden over time. So the community partner can look a lot of ways. The one thing that we say about the community partner is that it has to be a person or an organization external to your organization. So it cannot be your PTA or your PTO, for example, because we view that as being like an internal entity, if you will. Photos. So the photos for us, when you're uploading in your application, it really just helps our reviewers to envision your plan. If you're a brand new garden, you'll want to include, maybe a picture of the space where you're going to build the garden, but also then like a drawing or a diagram of what you're envisioning for the garden layout. That can look different too. If you're going to do something like hydroponic indoor gardening, that's going to look different than if you're going to build raised beds outside. So a lot of right answers here as well. No more than 3 photos get uploaded. The specifics of the file format and the size are all included on the website when you're applying. So no need to take note of all that here. But something to take note of that's super important is the photos really should be of your garden space. They don't need to include children. But if for some reason you do have kids in your photo, say you're building out your garden, and so your best photos, there happens to be a kid in them, only share them if they're children for whom you have photo releases. Really important thing to remember, as I'm sure, y'all know when you upload photos into our system. So our grant timelines. The grant window is currently open. It will remain open through the month of March. The deadline will be March 31st. We will do our review process from April through May. We work with a team of garden grant reviewers, subject matter experts, people who work in the school garden space all across the country. So really another great aspect of our program is, getting that expertise on the application review. And then the selection process takes place after all of the applications have been reviewed from May until August, and then we will notify regardless of decision on August 2nd. So everyone, whether they're awarded or not, will be notified on August 2nd. Then the process from there is we do a bit of back and forth, a handful of weeks are built in, and then the deadline to accept your grant and sign your grant agreement is at the end of August. I don't know the exact date yet, but you can expect for it to be around then, and then we start our shipping process. Packages will be received in the month of September. So, as I mentioned before, every year we typically get between 900 and 1,100 applications, and that is many more applications than we are able to fund gardens. So we fund as many as we're able, and everyone else that we do not fund, we put on an on-hold list that we pull from throughout the course of the year, should the opportunity become available to fund additional gardens. If we can't fund it by the end of that period of time, I'm realizing this says summer for our traditional timeline, this time won't be summer, but if we're unable to fund it by the time we open the next cycle, we let everybody know and we invite them to reapply. We keep really close track of every applicant who has applied and been placed on the on-hold list, and we definitely encourage you to use that as an opportunity to modify your grant application and resubmit. You don't have to start from scratch. You can utilize a lot of the same content, but then, make small edits. Another thing that we've recently started doing, which is super helpful, is the reviewers have the opportunity to provide a little bit of feedback when they review applications. So regardless of whether you're chosen, we will send some notes of feedback about the application, and that's another thing that can be really helpful if the grant application is placed on hold and y'all decide to reapply, to reference the feedback and really focus edits to your application on those areas. So some resources that are super helpful, can be super helpful on our website as you are preparing to submit your application. We have a copy of the application, a PDF version, if you want to just get the pen and paper type of situation versus working through the portal to review it. It's great. People will download the PDF and share it with others in their school so that they can view it without getting into the portal. We have a FAQs document, which is a lot of the information we're covering in this webinar. There is a grant writing tips document, which does not specify what you're supposed to include in your grant application, but more how to include it. It's really great. We developed it in partnership with Food Corps, again, as they have supported us in the past in reviewing our applications. And then we have our garden garden curriculum developed in partnership with the American Heart Association. It is specific to grades K through 5, but the entire thing is free for download on our website. We have a school garden resource center chock full of a lot of different things, the ones I've mentioned included, as well as others, including a couple of really great videos that have been created by people we've worked with and supported about how to run a garden, how to start a garden. And then success stories for other schools and organizations that have gone through this process. And then a kids club, which is full of like activities and book clubs, book suggestions, other things like that. So one example of a garden training video that we have on the website would be this, A Garden for Every School. Again, just a really great, beautiful resource to use if you're looking for, inspiration or ideas. So the grant portal, we are going to talk a little bit about the technicalities of it. I know we often get a lot of questions, and if you've written an email to us and we haven't yet gotten back to you, we will get back to you as soon as we're able. In terms of like registering, I know there's been a lot of questions about that as well. So we're going to talk a bit about it here. Maybe that will get some of your questions answered, and if not, we will be connecting with you. So you can take note of this link here, but you can also just go to our website and follow the Apply Here button. It will take you to our portal. It's called Smart Simple. This is where you'll register and or log in. So if you're a returning applicant, the registration process has already been done. You just put your email in here. If you are a returning applicant and you haven't signed in recently and you need password support, you can utilize the Forgot Password function as you see here. If you have any issues trying to do that, or you're unsure of what email you used or anything like that, again, reach out to us at Granted Whole Kids. We'd be happy to dig into that with you and for you. If you're a new applicant, you will have to register through the registration process. So you'll click the Register Here button on the login page. And you'll start by telling us what type of entity you are. So it's a really basic questionnaire of identifying if you're in the US or Canada, school or nonprofit, and then furthermore, if you're a US school, it will ask you to differentiate between public and private. And based on how you answer those questions, it will bring you to your registration page that will differ based on what kind of organization you are. So it will differ based on if you're in the US or Canada, and it will differ based on if you're a school or an organization. So the process is much the same, but what you're looking for is a little bit different. If you are a US school, you're going to be looking for your NCES number. If you have it, fantastic. If you don't have it, that's what the database is there for. So you'll see that green button where it says Search NCES Database. You'll want to go there. And I always tell people, be creative in your search, but be liberal with your search terms. So if you do not know your NCES number and you're looking for it, you're better off choosing a couple of words, one word, if you have a specific word in your school title, school name, to use that, and not much other information. If you have a common name in George Washington Middle School, you might choose to use only the city or the state. And what it will do is it'll return results for you, and that way you'll be able to select it. You'll find your NCES number. What will happen is if you type in all of the information, then it's going to look for exactly what you typed in, and you might not find any results. It'll just look for however it is in the system. So this is example here is Zilker Elementary. If we had written Zilker Elementary, it wouldn't have returned any results. So again, be liberal with your search terms. And then once you find your school or organization, your school in this case, you'll be able to verify it's the right one because it'll populate the address for you. You can select it, and it will auto-populate much of the information for you. So it'll get all those details like your address, city, NCS number, name, but there will be additional fields at the bottom that you will have to fill in. A couple of other just things to note is look very carefully at what fields are auto-populating and which are not. There will be some that don't. As you can see here, like state didn't auto-populate, so it might you might try and submit just not having noticed that it didn't auto-populate fully. So just take a careful eye with it when you're doing it. For your organization profile, same process, and my suggestion is the same. You're just going to be looking in a different database. So you're going to be searching the IRS tax exempt website for your EIN if you do not already have it. If you type in a lot of information exactly as you have it, you might not return any results because it's looking for exactly what you're typing in. So if you have your EIN in this particular situation, that's usually the best way to go, is just to find that, type that in, and then it will pull up your organization and you can click it and it will auto-populate. So for Canadian schools and organizations, it's going to take you to the same place. You're going to be doing the same search process in the CRA database. If you are a Canadian school, it is likely you will have to reach out to us. Canadian schools do not have their own number. They're usually affiliated with the school board or school district, so we can provide support in that way. If you're having any trouble at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. If you know it, fantastic. And then once you've filled in those information pieces that auto-populate, and then some stuff at the bottom that just is about like how many kids are enrolled in programming or in your school, the mission of the organization would be another example, and then like administration contact and your own contact, which is what will set you up as the primary contact. You'll submit and you'll get this registration complete page. This is how you know you've done it successfully. Once you've done this, it will send you an email with your login information and a temporary password. For anyone that tried to do this process right when the window opened, you may have experienced some trouble. Thank you so much for your patience and flexibility on that. We should have gotten that worked out. So everyone else here on out should be good, but of course, systems like this are not always perfect. So we are happy to support if you need any help at all. So some tips and tricks on registering in the system. Some things I've already mentioned is being liberal with your search terms. For the U.S. schools and organizations, the system wants to do this weird thing where it won't auto-populate the state for you. And if you don't grab that and you try and skip to the county, for whatever reason, it sticks. And so people experience a lot of trouble here, which is why I include it and want to share it with y'all. Just take a close eye at looking at the states auto-populating and then choosing county if that's relevant for your registration process. Using Chrome is typically best. The system responds best to Chrome, but that's not to say other browsers are not usable. The directions on the page will share a lot of this information that I'm sharing with you as well. So if you're feeling like you're not catching all of these details, no worries. It is outlined there as well. And then, of course, contact us if you get stuck. So what do you experience when you finally go through that registration process? You get in and your account in the portal will look like this. This is your home page. A few really important things to note here are that there are ways to edit and update your profiles, change your password. If you are an organization or if you are a person who will be applying on behalf of multiple schools or organizations, you're going to be utilizing this register new organization function that you see here on the left-hand side, as well as this little icon in the top that's a building, and taking note of this blue text in the middle. This is how you're going to be able to navigate between different organizations for whom you might be submitting applications. If you work for a school garden support organization and you're applying on behalf of 3 schools, this would apply to you. This is going to be how you navigate through that. So as I said, you'll be able to update or change your organization profile or personal profile. The personal profile will be your information, your name, your title, your phone number, your email address. That would be your login. And then the organization profile would be any information related to the school or organization that you've registered in the account. So when you're ready to finally apply, on the left-hand side, you'll see the Garden Grant application section with the Apply Now button at the bottom. And then you can, once you've started your application, it will live in the My Application section here in the middle of the page. And there are a couple of tabs. So as you go through our grant process, as you're working on it, it's always going to be in draft. And once you submit, You'll come back here and you won't see it necessarily right away because it's been moved over to the submitted tab, and then as we proceed through, it might move beyond that. So the fiscal sponsor, which I talked about a bit about before, this is what it looks like in the application itself. So this is what you can expect to see. If you do not have a fiscal sponsor, then you'll just choose no to step 1 here, and you won't have to worry about steps 2, 3, or 4, or the fiscal sponsor contact information. If you do have a fiscal sponsor, you'll pick these first, you'll identify what country it's in, and then you'll want to type in the fiscal sponsor organization, and if something auto-populates, that means that they're already in our system as a fiscal sponsor. So you can just select them and move on. If they're not, you'll have to register them as a fiscal sponsor. The process is very similar, but not as thorough as the registration process you may have gone through registering your own school or organization. It'll ask you for much less information, still having you search for those identifier numbers, CRA, EIN, and NCES. Then you will provide contact information for somebody within your fiscal sponsor entity, and then the grantee information. So if you don't have a fiscal sponsor, your grantee organization will be the same as the organization for whom you're applying. So if you're school A and you have no fiscal sponsor, grantee organization will also be school A. This just tells us who we're issuing the check to. Then you'll provide location information for where you would want the grant package sent to if awarded. And then the grantee contact would be anybody within your organization that has signing privileges for formal grant documentation. So for example, if you have to have your principal sign, then you would include that person here, and when this information is sent out, it will be sent to them. If you do have a fiscal sponsor, then this information should match the fiscal sponsor information. If you have a fiscal sponsor A, then grantee organization will be fiscal sponsor A. We're going to write the check to the fiscal sponsor. However, the location information, the delivery information can be wherever you've worked out to have the package or the grant check sent to. Typically, it's the fiscal sponsor because they're going to have to be responsible for depositing the check. So extended community support. This is similar to, but a little bit different than the community partner. While the community partner is required, this is not. So we just love to know about anyone in your community that you work with that is outside of your particular school or organization. So you don't have to have any set up, and that's okay. We see that a lot, but this just gives us an opportunity to know if you do. So you'll just select, it's similar to the community partner in that it doesn't have to be a nonprofit. It can be for-profit or nonprofit. It can be businesses. It can be churches, garden clubs, anything within your community. Again, another place where there's a lot of right answers. And then finally, the budget. So we have 3 components, budget components that we look at, that we have you share information about. We have the first big picture. We want to see in this first budget expenses, the whole picture for your garden program for an entire year. So this will likely, possibly likely, depending on what stage your garden is at, be beyond the $3,000 of this grant. If you're starting a new garden, it could be just the $3,000 of this grant. That's what's going to get you started over the course of the next year and beyond. But if you have a larger grant program, then you might have more costs, and therefore we'd want to see that outlined here. Then we want to know specifically how the $3,000 of this particular grant will be utilized to support your garden. Will be shorter for some scenarios, but not for all. And then we also ask if you have information or you already have other additional sources of incoming revenue to support your garden program set up, that you include that here. Again, if you don't have a lot to share here too, it's not a prerequisite, but this is one of those things that we speak to and we look at as it contributes to sustainability of a garden over time. Okay, So a lot of information. Perfect. We've got about 15 minutes for questions. We have a lot of people on this webinar today, so if you don't get your question answered, please rest assured that we take note and we have a report, and we do follow up on questions we don't get to. But I would be happy to answer 15 minutes worth of questions now. I'm going to have Kristen help me by fielding some of what she's been seeing come in as well.
Hello, everyone. So Stephanie, a few questions have come in about us publishing and sharing the slides in addition to the recording. Is this something that we will be doing?
Yes, I can definitely do that. Typically we have done that in the past. We're using a different platform this year, so it works a little bit differently. I think I can probably include it in the follow-up email that y'all get. So let me take note of it. If not, if there anyone that wants it, I'm happy to share it. Please reach out to us and ask for it. There might also be a way for us to share it on the website. So look for those. And if I can't make any of those happen and you don't see it come through the email, please reach out to us.
Awesome. And another question, we have a couple of preschool / early childhood organizations that are wondering if they are eligible. Will you clarify that for them?
I sure can. So if you serve only early childhood, only early child care and pre-K, unfortunately, you are not eligible at this time. We definitely recognize the value of all edible educational programs, gardens. So we're really hoping to be able to do that in the future. We just don't have the capacity to do it now. If you serve pre-K, early child care, and kindergarten, you are eligible. We just have to have some kids in that K through 12 age range in programming at your school or organization.
Great. And also there's a question asking if grant funds can be used for teachers' salaries.
Teachers' salaries, or so I think maybe what we're getting at here is can the grant funds be used to support like manpower for the garden? If you're trying to say that you want to use the grant to support like a garden coordinator, that kind of thing in that capacity, yes, you can do that.
Awesome. And there's a question about what an edible garden is and what is considered edible, like are herbs considered edible, that kind of thing? Yes,
an edible garden would be a garden where you're growing things, food, essentially. Most often it's like majority fruits and vegetables, but yeah, herbs would be another one. I think we've had people in the past ask us about different types of grains. That would also be considered edible.
Awesome.
And then I'll add an extension to that is if you already have an existing garden program and you're looking to maybe expand that garden program and you'd want to use partial grant funds to, specific to garden beds, but then you also wanted to expand your garden and have like a chicken coop, it's an extension of your garden program. That's something we also see. But for the most part, it's growing food, fruits and vegetables primarily.
Thank you. Additionally, would you go over some of the great resources that we have for grant writing tips? There was a question asking if we post examples of successful applications that we've had in the past, and I thought that would be useful for people to know.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really great question. So I think the best place you could go is to that grant writing tips document on our website. We don't share full applications only because we don't share that we're going to do that with applicants when they give us their info. But what the grant writing tips document does do is use a lot of examples of content that has been pulled out of past applications. One suggestion that document makes is something really basic, like being concise. And it's pulled out content from past applications of like a great example or a good example, a better example, the best example. So you'll see the comparison between some different application pieces that we've seen in the past.
And the next question is about NCES numbers. So if a school is having trouble finding their NCES number through the database, what should they do next?
That's a great question. If you've tried and you get a chance to try the suggestion of being liberal with your search terms, and you still can't find it, then just reach out to us. There's a lot of circumstances under which you might not find it in there. If your school name has changed, if you're a new school, if you're not a public school, you might not find it in there. So that could be one piece of it. But if you are a public school and you're just having trouble, I would, like I said, pick a specific, more unique word in the title of your school. If you have it, utilize that. If you don't, then I would pick a word and the state to at least narrow it down that way. The only reason I'm not suggesting searching like an entire area is because you're going to get a lot of schools and you might not be able to find the result that way. So try those tips, and then my best suggestion would be send us a note and we will help you. We'll find it for you, or we'll get you in the system otherwise.
For sure. And additionally, if you haven't been assigned an NCES number yet, that's totally okay. If you're a new school, sometimes that happens. Just reach out to us and we can help you get set up from our end.
Yeah, exactly. Kristen, are there other questions?
Yes, I'm sifting through the questions now. So one question says, can an individual master gardener be listed as a community partner?
Can an individual master gardener be listed as a community partner? Absolutely. And in the community partner portion of the application, it gives you a little bit of an opportunity, you provide a little short narrative of, what support and what the community partner provides to your garden program. So you'd be able to provide a little color to that as well.
Thank you. Also, will you go over who the grantee is in the application? There's a question asking if they should list the school or their name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's two pieces. There's the grantee organization and there's the grantee contact. The grantee organization is going to be who we are issuing the check to if awarded, and the grantee contact will be the person that you need to sign the grant agreement. So that could be you. We have no guidelines on who the grantee contact is that signs the grant agreement. That's totally up to what you need for within your organization.
There's a question asking if you can register and break the grant up in a school district's multiple gardens. So would the school district, or can a school district apply for multiple schools?
Sure, yeah. So it's a great question. Every school, the grant, one particular grant award, so $3,000, has to be utilized in one location to support one specific garden. So that would be to say a school district can most definitely apply on behalf of multiple schools, but they have to submit an application for each school they want to support, which does take more time, but it also means more money. Then each school has the potential of getting $3,000.
There's another great question here. It says, do admin and the person registering both get login information, or is it just the person registering?
No, that's a really great question. So unfortunately, we only are able to do one login per account. So we refer to that person as the primary contact of the grant. That's the person that you're putting in as applicant information when you register. it'll be under that email address. And I mean, you're of course open to share that with whoever is working with you on this project. But from our end, it's just the one email login.
Awesome, thank you. And another question says, if we have a program that is going to be implemented in summer of 2022, should we wait until next year to do this grant?
Summer of 2022. I think you could decide. This grant will be awarded in September, so you'd get the funds then, and we don't ask for a progress report until 14 months from when they're awarded. So that would give you a little bit of time to start implementing a project in the summer of 2022 before being required to submit a report. The other option is that we may, I don't know this for sure just because it's hard, things are hard to say, but we may be holding another cycle at the end of this year on our normal timeline. Typically, we do this process in September with awards early in the year. So that is also another option. You could wait and see if we have a cycle available in September for which you could be awarded in March of 2022. And then start your program and have more time before you're being required to report.
Great. And there's, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I just saw a really great question come through, a couple in the chat. Can you save the application and come back to finish it? Yes. And I'm emphasizing this because we recommend that you save often when you're working on the application. There's a button at the bottom, save draft. You know, at any point you add good content in there, save draft, so that you don't run the risk of being booted off the internet and losing some of that content. And then you can come back to it and finish as at your convenience.
Great. Will you also talk a little bit about how we select and how we're selecting applications this year and how many grants we plan on awarding? I know that it's a little bit different this time around.
Yeah. So in the past, we have awarded anywhere between 550 and 600 grants. We are not entirely sure this year, but I think it will be a little bit less than that. It is hard to say, but at a maximum, 550 is what we typically, 550 to 600 is what we typically do. And then what are we looking at when we are reviewing and selecting? You know, a lot of the things I talked about on the webinar in terms of, and I know I spoke about it briefly because we had so much to cover, but you know, things like child involvement in the garden and at every stage of the garden, you know, the integration not only into the curriculum, but into the overall culture of the school, or school and or organization and community. Support from within your organization, diverse support from within your organization. So not just like one science teacher, but say science teacher, art teacher, different groups of teachers, administration, PTA, food service staff sometimes gets involved. So that's another thing we look at is support from within as well as external support in your community. We have a team of garden grant reviewers that work in this space. They work, you know, in edible education and farm to school work, and they are, you know, very experienced in identifying programs that are ready. All of the programs are fantastic. So we're also looking at readiness and then sustainability over time. The likelihood that the garden will continue on beyond our support.
We have time for one more question. I saw this question and it was a really great one. And they asked, if we have a grant that was previously on hold, is there a way to access this application to help us with this new grant, the new application?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you've already gotten access to your portal, then the application you previously submitted should be in there. We can support you with getting in if you haven't already. Keep in mind that if that is the case, you cannot just edit your past application. You can definitely view it. You can copy paste content that's still relevant and then edit and update where you need to, but you do have to open a new application. And if, technical things like we can support you with like getting a full PDF download of it so you can, ease of working through it versus having to click in and out, that kind of thing. So it should be in your portal, and reach out to us if you need support getting in. Okay, so I'm seeing a ton of questions come through in the chat as well. I, as well as Kristen and another one of our interns, will do our absolute best to do follow-up on all of the questions that haven't been answered. We're going to take a report from everything submitted in the QA, and then I'm going to try and fit, go through the chat here. So if you haven't gotten your question answered already and you don't hear from us, please reach out to us. We are more than happy to answer any and all questions you have and want to support you all through the process. I will also share, we're going to be doing not a full webinar like this with a bunch of information, but we're going to hold some additional time for live Q&A like this. I think there's value in everyone applying, hearing from other people's questions. So on March 17th, the Wednesday at the same time, we will do something similar. If you find yourself on that day, really wanting to ask your question live, you'll have that opportunity. Otherwise, it's just easier. Please send us a note. We're excited to receive all of the applications. We thank you guys. We had a great turnout. Super excited to see everyone's submissions. Kristen, thank you so much for your support in answering questions. Again, here's our contact information one last time. Our website, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with since you found us on this webinar, as well as our email, grants@wholekidsfoundation.org. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.